IG Live. Today I'm excited to be talking to award-winning author Carole P. Roman. And she is someone that I always really admired. She's written a lot of fiction books as well as nonfiction. And as a homeschooler, I've used a lot of her books with my kids. Here are just a few of them that we have that introduce children to cultures around the world. And as I mentioned, she has a whole series of these introducing children to different countries, but she's also written a lot of other books like fiction and joke books and things like that. Ideas from, because she has written such a range of different kinds of books. So again, we do this every Thursday. Hello.
I figured it out. Oh my God, I had to call my
You
son.
got it.
I did. Now I have to worry about getting it back. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I just wanted to make sure I got on.
Yes, you're here. Well, I was just saying that, we do this every week, and it is always such a pleasure to get to talk to such fantastic authors and illustrators. So we're so happy to have you with us here today.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I have a feeling that most of the people watching probably already know who you are, but why don't we go ahead? You can introduce yourself and then tell us, what was your journey to becoming an author? Is that something you always knew you wanted to do?
Well, I always did, but I never knew it was going to be children's books. I always wanted to be a writer, but I wanted to write adult fiction. And I got busy with life. In fact, I think I did write an adult fiction when I was about 22 or 23, and I published it with Vanity Press, and it didn't go anywhere. Those things are it was different than self-publishing, like with KDP. It was a different world back then. So I got busy building a business with my husband, raising children, and then my mom passed away. My mom was my best friend, and when she died, I found myself, I was depressed, and I generally don't get depressed, but I couldn't find a place for myself. We worked together, we played together. It was very hard. So my son told me, write a book, Mom. And so we had kind of a contest, and everybody went home and thought of a subject, and we came back, and that was Captain No Beard. So I wrote Captain No Beard, and my sons, both of them, found an illustrator on Create Space. This is when it was before it was KDP, and it took over my life. I really enjoyed the whole process, picking, like, I never thought about having to figure out what did my characters look like. I was an avid reader, but I had never put together a book. Well, we put together Captain No Beard, and it's based on game time with my grandson, who's now got his driver's license.
Oh.
So it was imaginary play when he was about 4 years old. And then, he had a brand new cousin who came in, and she's the female character in there. But believe me, she was just eating and drinking a bottle back then. And the book was named to Kirkus Review's Best of 2012. So imagine my surprise when Create Space called me and said, "Oh my God, we can't believe it, but the book made it to the best of Indies for 2012." And so my husband said, "Well, write another." So then I wrote a yoga book, which kind of was just thrown together, but I wanted to have a book dedicated to now my little granddaughter. But what happened was, we went to Vegas. We had a business starting in Vegas. We were walking around, and my grandson asked me what was the Eiffel Tower in front of Paris, the hotel. So how do you or a 5-year-old? So I went back to the hotel, and I was thinking, what would happen if I wrote a series called If You Were Me and Lived In, and took 10 basic facts of what it was like to live in a country, what your name would be, what you would call your mother, what you would call your father, what would money be like. And the series took off. My husband loved it, and he said, yes, there it is, the Eiffel Tower. And what you would eat. So it's kind of almost like one of those travel shows, like Andrew Zimmern, or back then it was Anthony Bourdain. It was sort of like a taste of culture, but enough for a kid that if they heard the word Paris, they'd know, oh, that's in France, so I always picked the capital. And the book became very big with the homeschool crowd. I would have never even known to go after that market, but it became very big with homeschoolers. And so I did 22 of them, and I ended the series with "If You Were Me and Lived in Mars."
Yes. So fun.
And and I had a great time. You know, it's now we're in a year into it. So do you want me to keep going? Because I did 83 books. I ended up with 80.
Well, where do you get your, I mean, I know you talk about, some of this came out of your interactions with your grandchildren, but you've written such a wide range of books, which is really unusual. I mean, one, a lot of times people write either fiction or nonfiction, and you've written both. You also have written joke books. Like, where do you get your ideas from?
Well, from the kids, I'm surrounded, I have four grandchildren. I have four children in that I have two sons and two daughter-in-laws. They're like my kids.
Mm,
So it's like children of, I have two brothers. I have a whole family of people that
right.
if they read the books, they're going to find themselves in the characters. But mostly I get motivated. I work with my sons in our day job. I'm the CEO of a ground transportation company that uh, provides transportation all over the world, mostly to movie studios and Fortune 500 people. So I'm pretty active. We built the business, my husband and I, from ground zero. I lost him in 2018. And writing has been, he was sick for 15 years. So it started with my mom, but when my husband, they both got lung cancer within 3 months of each other.
Mm,
She passed after 22 months, but he survived. But it actually ruined his life. The treatment ruined his life, where we were this couple that were flying all over the world. We were doing all this stuff, and now we had to be housebound. It was very hard for him to travel, and he was very angry. So I stayed by his side, and I
mm,
didn't want to get in his way. He had the TV. I was in the computer, in our computer room, and I would write. And fantasy, like I'd get motivated by something as simple as a sunrise, or my grandson. I remember I was babysitting one night, and he told me he wanted to steal the aurora borealis, and I ended up writing a Captain No Beard story that ended up being a tale about you can't take what's not yours.
mm,
But every book was motivated. I wrote this one during the COVID lockdown, and it's basically about being comfortable with
mhm.
yourself. And there was also there were three of them during the COVID lockdown. And while this is like, it's really a book about being lonely. And it's about an empty nester. And it may be a children's book. And I didn't even realize it when I wrote it,
Mm,
but it's about Mrs. Rabbit, because that was that Thanksgiving. I was eating alone because we were washing our vegetables during the pandemic.
right.
So we didn't get together, and there were holidays that we were alone. And I that was the motivation to write a book. Then there's you know, my young adults, because the kids, as they grew, I read with my grandchildren.
Right.
And so we read series. And so I said I could do that. And I would come up with an idea and I would write it.
I want to make sure we have time to talk about your young adult book, but first, I did have some questions about these books, which, as you mentioned, are popular with homeschoolers, which I am
Right.
one. I have to say, one of the things I loved about it too is you also did historical
Yeah, I
ones,
have them
including the
here.
one about the ancient Mali Empire, which there are so few children's books about, I mean, that not just that a lot of times people do different countries, and when they say around the world, they really just mean Europe. And you
Hmm.
don't, you go all around the
I
world.
do.
Yeah, so I'm curious, because you do also have a background as a social studies teacher.
Yes, yeah.
Right? So what was the gap that you saw this filling in
Well,
in the literature?
the gap, when I started with the first series, it was really about, there was nothing about culture. How do you explain culture to a 4 or 5 year old?
Right.
And so I wanted them to have a smattering of words, an idea. And now, the books really took, I have cousins who are teachers too,
Mhm.
and they love the books because they say, like for instance, I put up study things for, I said, take your child to the supermarket and go down the international aisle and cook a dish, make couscous or make something, I mean, related to whatever you're reading in the book, look up a recipe because we have the internet at our disposal, or write I would, when I would go speak at schools, I had postcards and I would ask the kids to write a postcard about the country they were visiting. So when I did the first book, I I did 5 books in one weekend. That's how I would do it, because I would write 5 books in one. I would have them spread across, and I would be doing each one. And I used various resources. I'd call the consulate. I'd find the biggest help was going to restaurants, going to a Cuban restaurant, going to a Chinese restaurant, going to whatever country I was doing. I would go to a restaurant corresponding the food, and I would taste the food and then just talk about, well, what did you eat when you were a kid? Oh, the Vegemite nearly killed me. I got Vegemite. It was like eating moss. But the point is, like, I wanted to experience it so I could talk about it and tell people. And I wanted kids to understand, there was a chart that we made that in certain parts of the world, papa and dada was used, and then there was baba. And you watch how language changes, or the fact that these names sound like mine, these names sound very different. So when I started it, I said the 4 corners of the globe. So I did Mexico because it was our nearest neighbor. I did France because I like France, um, and because of the Eiffel Tower. South Korea because I would get my nails done, and I had a whole bunch of women who were willing to help me learn about South Korea, and it was I had firsthand information. Then I did Norway because it was as far north as I could think of that came to my mind. And then I did Kenya, and people went crazy over Kenya because they said people call it Africa. They don't realize there are countries.
Right.
It never occurred to me. I did Kenya because Obama was president. So that was forefront in the news. And interestingly enough, when I picked the ten uh, books, the 10 subjects for this series, I picked Mali because I was fascinated with Mali and with the whole empire and the salt and the gold and the whole background. And that is actually one of my favorites of the series. I found out I had a Malian ancestor after I wrote the book. I did the DNA, and I found out I have a Viking ancestor. I don't have the Mali book out. I took the American West. And I have a Malian, a ninth great grandmother that came from Mali. There it
That's
is. And
amazing.
I love that book. I loved about the griot and about it's writing that was just, I just enjoyed, writing about how a man tells the history, because that's what I do. I remind my kids constantly about our family history. I've done the research, and I could go back to the late 18th century with us. So it's pretty interesting, or mid 18th, 18th century I can get into. So it's really fascinating, and it's almost like they come full circle, and it's almost as though the story was inside of me and waiting to be told. And I didn't know. I picked a girl for that one, and it just so happens I had this grandmother 9 generations back who came from there. So very interesting.
Yeah. And one of the things I really appreciate about the books too is I think that they help kids. They're not just learning the information, they're imagining themselves
Right.
living there. I mean, that's one of the brilliant things you do in the book is that they can really see themselves living there. So how do you think books like this help build empathy in children?
Well, the problem is most people hate history. I've always loved history. I've loved history since I was a kid. And I couldn't understand, how could you not enjoy history? It's so related. It's almost like a chain, that if you understand the age of exploration, you'll understand the Renaissance, and you're gonna, if you understand, the Middle Ages, or what people used to term the Dark Ages, which we don't call it that, but medieval times, you understand how it's all connected. But it's always told in such a dry way. I could never remember the names. They all sounded the same to me. So what I did was I personalized it, and I put people in the shoes of a child who had siblings. And, I got a lot of blowback from people who talked about the issues of slavery, but we can't gloss over that was occurring, and it was a part of people's lives. And I wanted to portray the books as as realistically, not with our standards, but with standards of the time. Like in that book, she's getting married at 14, which offended people. But I said, but I can't lie about what happened, because that's how we got to where we are today. We don't do that now because we realize the mistake of those that don't read history are destined to repeat it. So it's really important that you understand why people dressed like that, why girls didn't have education, that it's so important that we are educated now. It's just really interesting. And I never glossed over things like that with my own children. I always told them the truth. I always told them the truth about everything.
Right.
And I mean, I was gentle with it, but and I did that I felt that I gave in the door opening, so that if someone was truly interested, then they would research. And that's what these books are. They're conversation starters. Why was it like that? Why didn't women have rights? Why couldn't they own property? Why were they, it just opens a door. We have to know about these things. So I tried to be as authentic to the time period as I could. And there's humor in there too, like, picking up buffalo chips along the way for fuel when on, or some things were amusing, that they would put milk on the side of the wagon and the movement would turn it into butter.
Right.
So, a young man getting his first horse, all the rules that, if somebody takes your horse, that's punishable by, severe punishment. So the whole idea was to give them a picture through a telescope of what life was like, and understand how lucky we are to live today, and what people had to do to get us here.
Right. And you've got a wonderful comment saying, if you were me and lived in colonial times, is a great U.S. history, and Mars is an amazing look at our possible future. So yeah, you really covered the whole gamut of what other cultures are like today, what it's been in the past, and what it might look like in the future. That's a really great comment. And
Thank you.
I'm just looking at the time, and I feel like I could spend the whole time talking about this series, but people need to know you've written a lot of other kinds of books, including, I would love to talk about your YA book, because it's kind of really different for you.
It was. Well, before we go on to that, there's two of these which were really cute little books. I wrote these based on, I was working with a lot of women who had blogs, and they were so pushed. And I was a working mom. I worked in the house back in the day until we moved the business out. And this is a book to remind, it's as important for moms as it is for kids, because it reminds mom that you're setting an example for your children. And if they see that you can't say no, that you don't set boundaries, that you're working all the time, that you're going to create that expectation on your daughters or sons, that we have definite work time and play time, and we teach the children set a boundary. And so, oh, Susannah is about a young girl who keeps stuffing her proverbial problems into her backpack until it explodes. And the thing is that the mom realizes they're not communicating, and she's not telling her daughter, tell me what's bothering you. The second book is about fears, and how fears are um, they're personal. So while you may say, I'm afraid I'm going to catch a cold, another person's afraid of clowns, or a person there happens to be a girl who's challenged, she can't see, she's afraid of sharp objects because she can't anticipate.
Right.
So it really, you have to respect fear and what people are afraid of, and it's personal to whatever their experiences have been. Moving on to Grady Whill was an idea. My son is an author, and he wanted to do a book about a superhero high school, and he created a story called Willpower, but never went anywhere with it. And I said, if you're not going to write this, can I take the notion and expand on it? And I had a reviewer whose name was, so I took the book, and it what happens with me is, as I write, the story pours out. I don't plan. They call that, are you a plotter or a pantster? I go by the seat of my pants, and I let the characters tell the story. So Arush is is what's neurodivergent. Grady has asthma, and each one of these kids that get accepted to this extraordinary high school where they'll learn superpowers have some sort of challenge. And what they learn is that their challenge is actually their superpower. And it's all about how you use it. I love this book. I absolutely love this book. I loved writing it. I loved reading it. I laugh. I did it from the voice of a 14-year-old boy. I don't know how I did it, but it feels authentic. And I love the character. And there is a script right now floating around Hollywood. So fingers crossed, we're gonna get a movie out of this one.
That's so exciting. And what age is this? Is a YA book,
It
right?
is a YA, but you can they call it middle grade, but I wrote it as young adult, but
Okay.
that's how people, do it. But this book, when I wrote it, we were fresh out of Harry Potter, reading Harry Potter and Percy Jackson. So it's kind of like I have people working in my office who are Potterheads and they read, so I think that this book, it's all about self-discovery. And I think I wrote it in the way that I'm hoping that parents read it with their children and they get it as well.
Mm.
It's a lot of fun. It's pure, it's adrenaline, it's fun, and it's funny, it's sweet. When the young man who was writing the script, he called me up and he said, I have to tell you, there's one scene. He says, I actually got teary. It was just such a meaningful scene, and that meant a lot to me.
Mhm.
I love the book, and if there's a movie, there will be a sequel. But I kind of pulled back on it because you have to make more sales in order to really push the books. So
Right. Well, that is so exciting. We'll watch out for announcements of that. And thank you for taking the time. I know you're quite busy, so I it is such a treat to get to talk with you. I've been reading your books for years, and I know you've been a longtime supporter of Read Your World, so it's really fun to have you on here.
reading is such a freeing thing. It just opens up the world. And what people don't realize, one of the best experiences I ever had was reading over Zoom with my grandchildren, to the point where when my grandson was offered go out with his friend, he said, no, we're in the middle of something. I got to find out what happened. So when you hear a child say one
Mhm.
more chapter, and I'm not talking about my books, we read everybody's
Right.
books. It really means a lot. And Giggles Galore um, also has another chapter of Susannah in it. So this was the biggest surprise when this book, not this one, but the first of this series, went to number one on Amazon. It outsold every book on it. No one was more surprised than I was, or delighted. Who knew, right?
Right.
Um, that a joke book was going to go. I mean, it really, it shook me, you know.
Well,
So three other ones
like
followed.
you said, you do have so much humor in your books, and that it makes sense. But one thing I love is that you already kind of mentioned. I mean, there's a lot of humor in the books and kind of adventures, but they all have kind of a lesson,
Yes.
and sometimes it's not quite as direct, but it's kind of this gentle lesson that you're giving to them.
But even this one, the Susannah story, is about when does humor cross a line?
Mm,
When when does it become not funny?
right.
You know, you want people laughing with you, not at you. And again, I didn't plan on the story. I wrote the book. I did my research on the jokes. I did research on the little fun facts that I think will get kids interested in reading. This is like a great book. If you have a shy child, it's a
Mm,
great icebreaker.
yes.
It's a great, it is, because, you have a kid who's nervous, tell a joke, make them memorize one of the chicken cross the road kind of jokes, and it's an icebreaker, even if it's a grown worthy joke or a little bit of information like, why does this happen? What was the significance of a turkey with Franklin, what's
Benjamin
his name?
Franklin.
Benjamin
Yeah.
Franklin. So, these kind of fun facts will get a kid something to talk about if they're nervous. And so that's the book is great, and it also has a lesson on how to make your own joke. So how to create your own joke. But more importantly, and I love the Oh Suzanne at the end of this book, it's
Mhm.
all about when does a joke, because there's a brother who teases his sister and it hurts her feelings. And Susanna doesn't realize she's laughing along with the brother of her friend, not realizing that her friend, that this is hurtful, and she doesn't want to hurt her friend. But you have to be sensitive to other people. And I just love the fact when I get a note saying, your book helped my kid through a really tough time, or it opened a door for me. Or we drove down to Florida from New York in the car, and the kids each had a copy, and we're busy telling each other jokes, even though we wanted to jump out of the car. We listened to the jokes over and over again.
Oh, that must be so gratifying to hear, to get that kind of feedback.
It is. It is. I only started writing when I was 55, 56. So this is like, and to reinvent your life, it was as gratifying for me as it was for, I learned how to market. I market my son's books. I write as an adult. I have adult fiction too. So all these different things, it created a whole new existence for me, especially when I was at the lowest point of my life.
Well, one last question. I
Sure.
have to know, what did your son say? The one who challenged you to write that first book. What does he say now?
He challenges me all the time, because I edit his books, and I market his books. But he called me yesterday and he said, "Come on, Mom, you got to do another one like Grady Will." So I don't know. I said it's in the pot. We'll see what's going to happen. I just have to wait and see I kind of am waiting on hold, because I want to see which direction that script goes in, because you want to kind of make the second book match the series. I don't want to take it on my flight of
Right,
fancy.
have
Um,
it go in a different direction than
exactly.
the.
Yeah. So we'll see. I actually started it, but we'll see. There's something to writing, to producing a book, and then going through all the edits, and then picking the cover, and it's kind of it's really nice. It's almost like a birth, because you're creating something. So it's been a wonderful part of my life. It got me into a community that is ageless. Nobody cares what you look like. Nobody. It's such a great community. The other authors talking about helping other people, because I do help other authors get their books published, and I really love that whole reinvention. Really connected me when a lot of people are kind of closing down and feeling like they don't want things to do. I'm going out and reading in front of an audience, or doing an interview. It's really, I think it's keeping me, I don't want to say young, but maybe relevant.
Yeah, well, lucky for us, because your books are such a gift, and this interview is such a gift. Thank you for taking the time to talk with
Thank
us.
you so much. I appreciate it, and I appreciate you.
Thank you, and to everybody watching, if you joined us late, don't worry. The whole thing will be up on Instagram in a few minutes, and later on our YouTube channel. Thanks again.
You're welcome.
Bye.
Bye bye.